Welcome to the deep dive. Today, you and I are going to unpack a really fascinating and pivotal moment in recent political history, the final weeks of Joe Biden's 2021 presidential campaign, just before he withdrew.
Right.
Our primary source for this is Christopher Whipple's book, Unchartered. Think of this as, your shortcut to understanding some of the surprising behind-the-scenes events and the key players who influenced that decision, all drawn from discussions about this insightful book.
Yeah, and our mission here really is to give you a deeper, more nuanced understanding than you'd get from just reading the headlines. We're going to explore the motivations, the actions, and some genuinely unexpected details that shape this crucial moment. So, yeah, let's get started.
Absolutely. And let's kick things off with something that might have, flown under the radar for many, but apparently had a significant impact. George Clooney's op-ed. It's described as overlooked, but quite impactful. What made it so potent?
Well, what's really interesting about that op-ed is the kind of double whammy it delivered. On one level, it gave politicians who might have been feeling, uneasy about Biden's candidacy a sort of permission slip, a seemingly respectable reason to start suggesting he should step aside.
Oh, okay.
But perhaps even more significantly, it was a very clear signal to the big Hollywood donors that the money spigot for Biden's campaign needed to be turned off, like right now.
Right, and this wasn't just any celebrity weighing in. The discussions around Whipple's book really emphasized Clooney's deep personal investment and his genuine influence within the Democratic Party. We're talking about someone described as not just George Clooney, but a figure with real power, whether you see that through the lens of political elites or maybe more charitably as concerned patriots. This devastating op-ed, as it's called, clearly landed with some serious force. Why do you think his voice carried so much weight with both politicians and donors?
That's a crucial question. I think with politicians, Clooney's stature offered a degree of insulation. You know, they could point to his concerns as a reflection of broader anxieties within the party, making their own similar sentiments seem less politically risky.
Makes sense.
And for donors, particularly in Hollywood, Clooney isn't just a celebrity. He's a significant figure within their community, someone whose opinions often hold sway and can influence financial decisions. Think of it like peer pressure, but with really high-stakes political implications.
That makes a lot of sense. And this brings us to the rather dramatic Morning Joe controversy and Clooney's, shall we say, spirited reaction. Apparently, Mika Brzezinski suggested on air that Barack Obama had essentially given Clooney the green light to write this op-ed. Whipple describes Clooney's response as absolutely ballistic. What does that kind of reaction tell us?
Oh, the sheer intensity of Clooney's reaction is incredibly telling. This profanity-laced phone call with a Morning Joe producer where he felt utterly betrayed, like, you effed me, you're my friend, you should have stood up for me. It really underscores how personally he took Brzezinski's insinuation.
Wow.
It suggests he believed his actions were his own initiative, right?
Oh.
And that the suggestion of Obama pulling the strings undermined his credibility and, well, his integrity.
Absolutely. And the producer's attempts to downplay the situation are almost hard to believe. Lines like, this is not a movie, nobody effing cares, and skywriting, it's like they were operating on completely different planets in terms of understanding the significance of it.
Totally different planet, yeah.
Clooney questioning trust and the producer's blunt response just highlights a relationship completely fracturing under pressure.
And if we zoom out a bit and connect this to the bigger picture, Whipple makes a really important point. Clooney's later public statements, downplaying the op-ed's significance, they don't align with the full, intense story of what was happening behind the scenes and how Biden's decision ultimately came about.
Right.
There were clearly powerful undercurrents and, frankly, personal dramas influencing events far beyond a simple, considered decision by Biden himself.
And the role of Obama in all of this still feels a bit murky, doesn't it? Bill Daley's comment, I don't think he would have given him a red light, is intriguing. It's not an endorsement, but it definitely leaves the door open to the possibility of some level of tacit approval or at least, a lack of discouragement. What do you make of that?
Daley's comment is fascinating because it hints at the subtle ways influence can be exerted in political circles. It might not have been a direct instruction, perhaps, but maybe an understanding of Obama's general sentiment or a feeling that the former president wouldn't actively oppose such a move. It speaks to the complex web of relationships and unspoken understandings that often shape these high-stakes decisions.
Let's shift gears now and talk about the Biden family's reaction to that really difficult debate with Donald Trump. It sounds like it was an incredibly emotional experience, particularly for Valerie Biden Owens, who was described as distraught, in tears, and furious. What does that kind of raw emotion tell us about the internal dynamics of the campaign?
Well, that immediate visceral reaction from Valerie Biden Owens, what did they do to my brother at Camp David? It speaks volumes about the deep personal investment of the family and their fierce protectiveness of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
It suggests a deep concern that something went fundamentally wrong during his debate preparation, and maybe a suspicion that external factors might have negatively impacted him.
And her blaming the debate team, questioning his last-minute arrival, and even focusing on his appearance that didn't have decent makeup and looking like Dorian Gray comments really underscore the family's distress and their attempt to understand what happened. It almost feels like they were grasping for explanations for what they witnessed.
Exactly. It highlights the intense emotional toll these campaigns take on candidates and their families. While Jill Biden presented a supportive public front, we can only imagine the private conversations and concerns within the family. Their reactions underscored the very personal stakes involved and how those emotions can influence perceptions and potentially even decisions.
It's almost hard to believe, given the gravity of the situation, but Whipple's book reveals a significant lack of candid, tough conversations within Biden's inner circle. These are people whose job you'd think was to provide clear-eyed and realistic assessments. Why do you think those conversations didn't happen?
That's a really important question. It likely speaks to a complex interplay of factors. There might have been a reluctance to confront a powerful figure like a presidential candidate with uncomfortable truths, perhaps out of respect, loyalty, or even, fear of jeopardizing their own position. There can also be a kind of groupthink mentality within campaigns, where dissenting voices are unintentionally suppressed in favor of a more unified, optimistic front.
And Bill Daley's anecdote about Tom Donilon confirming that even Mike Donilon, someone described as Biden's alter ego, hadn't had that crucial, "Are you sure you're up for this?" conversation really highlights this internal dynamic. It suggests a significant gap in the kind of honest feedback you'd expect at that level.
It paints a picture of an environment where perhaps the desire to win, or maybe just a deep-seated belief in Biden, overshadowed the need for a truly objective assessment of his capacity. This lack of internal challenge could have had serious consequences as they approached those critical final weeks of the campaign.
Then we have this almost unbelievable secret meeting between Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden. Apparently, it took place at the White House residence, not the Oval Office, specifically to avoid being seen, her goal, to convince Biden to withdraw from the race. What does the secrecy surrounding this meeting tell us?
The secrecy speaks volumes about the sensitivity and the potential explosiveness of the conversation. The fact that it was held in the residence away from the usual official settings underscores the desire to keep it completely under wraps. Pelosi's intervention was clearly a matter of significant political weight and potential controversy.
And the fact that Biden's chief of staff, Jeff Zients, only reluctantly confirmed the meeting further emphasizes its delicate nature. The initial focus of their conversation on America and their shared history and faith suggests Pelosi was trying to appeal to Biden on a very personal level, framing her request in terms of his legacy and the greater good of the country.
Right. And even though Biden didn't immediately agree, Pelosi's belief that she had gotten through to him because of their established trust is a key point. Given that this meeting occurred just 10 days before Biden ultimately withdrew, it strongly suggests that her intervention, and perhaps others like it, played a significant role in his final decision.
It's also fascinating that Pelosi's public comments on Morning Joe, waiting for him to make up his mind, actually happened before this secret meeting later that same day.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It adds another layer of complexity to her public pronouncements and suggests a carefully managed public narrative while more serious conversations were happening privately. And this all unfolded before Schumer's similar efforts, really positioning Pelosi's meeting as potentially the most pivotal one.
It certainly highlights a coordinated, though perhaps not overtly publicized, effort by key figures within the Democratic Party to address the growing concerns surrounding Biden's ability to continue the campaign effectively. Pelosi, with her long history and significant influence within the party, likely carried a particularly weighty voice.
Now, let's switch perspectives and look at the Trump campaign. Surprisingly, Paul Manafort, despite his very public withdrawal and recent release from prison, was apparently still quite involved behind the scenes. What insights does this offer?
Yeah, this is one of those behind-the-curtain details that provides a fascinating glimpse into how campaigns really operate. Despite his public profile, Manafort was reportedly at the convention and actively involved in shaping it, operating under the radar.
Ugh.
This suggests that even individuals with significant baggage can still wield influence in political campaigns.
And his regular communication with Whipple, offering insights into Trump's thinking, provides a unique and potentially unfiltered perspective on how the opposing campaign was viewing this situation. It's like getting a peek behind enemy lines, you know?
Exactly. And Manafort's confident prediction the day before Biden's withdrawal, he's out this weekend, is particularly striking. It suggests that the Trump campaign, or at least key figures within it, had a strong sense of what was coming, possibly based on their own intelligence gathering or, observations of Biden's declining public appearances.
Turning our attention to Kamala Harris, it seems she was making preparations for the possibility of Biden stepping aside days in advance. What do these actions suggest about her awareness of the situation?
Well, the fact that Harris was discreetly reaching out to Democratic operatives through channels that couldn't be directly linked to her campaign to examine the rules for capturing the nomination suggests a level of preparedness and an awareness that the political landscape could shift suddenly.
Definitely strategic.
Yeah, it points to a strategic mindset and a readiness to seize a potential opportunity.
Examining the rules for the nomination definitely indicates a proactive approach. The fact that she wasn't shocked by the news of Biden's withdrawal and that they were ready to go implies a level of anticipation within her camp. While we don't know if she knew the exact day, the groundwork was clearly being laid.
It highlights the inherent ambition and strategic planning that are always present in political operations, especially when there's uncertainty at the top. Harris's actions demonstrate that she and her team were seriously considering and preparing for the possibility of Biden's departure.
Finally, let's tackle this question of a potential cover-up. Whipple argues against a classic Watergate-sense cover-up, where there's a deliberate hiding of a known truth. Instead, he describes something more like a fog of delusion and denial within Biden's inner circle. What's the distinction he's drawing?
Whipple's distinction is crucial here. He's suggesting that it wasn't necessarily a calculated conspiracy to deceive the public about Biden's fitness. Instead, he posits that many within his inner circle genuinely believed in his ability to win and to govern effectively, perhaps fueled by a desire to see him succeed or a reluctance to confront uncomfortable realities. It's more about a collective self-deception, perhaps.
The absence of a Ted Kaufman-like intervention, as happened in Biden's 1988 campaign when a trusted friend stepped in with the hard truth, is really telling here, isn't it?
It really is.
That kind of honest, potentially uncomfortable conversation didn't seem to occur this time. The suspension of disbelief that allowed Biden to be put on that debate stage seems to underscore this internal denial.
And the fact that advisors like Mike Donilon and Jen O'Malley Dillon seemingly convinced themselves of Biden's mental acuity further supports this idea of a shared delusion. Even the campaign's earlier strategy of hiding him in the basement during the 2020 campaign, while framed around COVID, raises the obvious follow-up question. What was the long-term plan once the pandemic eased? What do we do now?
Right. And Ron Klain's own reported observations during debate prep at Camp David, describing Biden as wobbly, unable to discuss second-term plans, wandering off, falling asleep, and struggling with prep sessions, paints a really stark picture. And Whipple emphasizes that readers should really pay attention to Klain's own account in the book. It certainly challenges any narrative of a candidate fully prepared for the rigors of a presidential campaign and the presidency itself.
Ultimately, Whipple's argument suggests a much more complex and perhaps more human story than a straightforward cover-up. It speaks to the power of belief, the difficulty of confronting uncomfortable truths, and the immense pressures within a high-stakes political campaign that can lead to a collective blind spot.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's quickly recap some of the key insights we've uncovered. George Clooney's explosive reaction really reveals the intense tension and behind-the-scenes drama surrounding Biden's eventual withdrawal. The raw and immediate emotion from Biden's family after that difficult debate highlights the deeply personal stakes involved. Nancy Pelosi's secret meeting underscores the significant pressure being exerted on Biden from within his own party.
Yeah, that was huge.
Paul Manafort's continued behind-the-scenes influence offers a surprising and perhaps unsettling perspective from the opposing campaign. And finally, the question of delusion versus a deliberate cover-up within Biden's inner circle remains a really complex and thought-provoking point.
Absolutely. And this brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Considering all of these individual actions, motivations, and perspectives that we've discussed, How does this complicate your understanding of presidential leadership and the incredible pressures surrounding those who hold or seek that power? What does this series of events tell us about the often fragile dynamics between personal ambition, the interests of a political party, and the perceived well-being of a leader? This goes so far beyond a simple he should have or he shouldn't have narrative. Instead, it really forces us to confront the messy and often opaque reality of high-stakes decision-making at the very highest levels of American politics.